Excited for you to meet Todd Youse today. Todd is a highly experienced senior recruitment and talent acquisition leader, and he has over 20 years of experience in recruiting. He currently serves as the director of talent acquisition at KabaFusion, and they are the world's largest privately held home infusion company in the US. Todd specializes in talent acquisition, sourcing of candidates, process improvement, employment branding, and recruitment marketing. He is known for building high performing teams, leading strategic initiatives, and implementing effective workforce planning programs.
iHire connects you to industry-specific jobs in over 57 talent communities. Find your niche today on iHire.
Well, Todd, thank you so much for joining us on the Find Your Niche podcast today. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Me as well. I'm excited to be here.
Tell me how you got to the point where you are now a recruiter and a talent acquisition person.
Yeah, so probably date me a little bit, but I replied to a posting on Craigslist.
Oh, wow.
It tells you how long ago that was. Small little boutique recruiting firm in Portland, Oregon. Very niche type of stuff, which I'm still doing today. Didn't know really anything about recruiting. Most of my background had been in sales and got in. The owners took me under their wing, sort of learned the business. A lot of it I just learned for myself. And here I am. I mean, it was just, one of those things where it just stuck. It wasn't necessarily a career path that I had chosen for myself. But once I got into it, it rolled, my love of talking to people. It rolled the sales aspect of things I like to do, just all into one. And I've just been able to thrive at it. I tell everybody I found my career, just by chance, by accident. It wasn't something I went to college and majored in. I just fell into it and turned out it was what I love to do. And so I've been doing it ever since. For the last 15 years, I've been in recruiting.
Todd, tell me about what your day to day as a recruiter looks like. Walk me through a typical day.
Yeah, and my role is a little bit different because I'm also the director of talent acquisition for this company. So I have a team underneath of me as well. So my day is a little split, but normally I do a lot of recruiting. I mean, on an average week, I have probably 20 to 25 candidate phone calls. So a lot of screening of candidates that apply to the jobs, setting up those phone calls, doing the screenings, vetting them, making sure they're a good fit for us, submitting them. So putting their bio, I guess you could say, together, submitting them to our hiring managers. But also at the same time, I think I've built a good rapport with our hiring managers so that a lot of times we just schedule the interviews. So I have a coordinator that I then coordinate those interviews. And so we go right onto their calendars, schedule all the calls. But writing the bios is a big one, really selling the candidate to the hiring manager, and
Right.
selling the company to the candidate, which is where that sales aspect of what I really like to do comes into play. And then, just follow up, following up, big thing for what I preach and what my team does is we push the process. Sometimes our hiring managers are not the most expeditious with their feedback or moving to the next steps. So one of the things we do is we really take the time to follow up with the candidate, close them, get the feedback from the hiring manager so that we're, right now it seems like it's a race against time in other companies. Candidates
Right.
have multiple interviews, multiple offers. So we need to get there faster. Sometimes the next guy is really what it is. So we don't allow things to fester. It's a yes or a no, let's go. So my day is definitely a little more chaotic maybe than a normal recruiter's day, simply because they can focus on recruiting. Unfortunately, I don't get as much time to focus. I piece it all together, but that's usually what the day to day looks like. I mean, it's a lot of really screening the candidates for fit. You can get a lot from their resume that just says, hey, are you qualified, by looking at their resume, but are you the personality, the culture fit that we're looking for at our locations? That's probably the biggest thing we screen for.
Well, and I appreciate it when you say that you really try to give the candidates some closure on what's going on. We recently did a study and it said that 38% of candidates who get ghosted during that interview, application, hiring process will form a very negative brand impression of that company.
Yeah.
So it's great that your company is trying to give that follow through.
And we sort of set the rule of 48 hours. So 48 hours after any contact. So we try to get, once you've applied, our goal is to get through your application and at least tell you a yes or no within 48 hours. After an interview, we want to be able to give you feedback within 48 hours if it's, hey, we're moving forward or we're not. We don't want a week to go by where they're just sitting there. I mean, that's my biggest thing is, especially if they're really excited about us as a company and we're not moving forward. I don't want
Yeah,
them to just sit there and be like, okay, what's going on, and have that pit in their stomach for a week. So we try.
right.
48 hours is our rule of thumb. We don't always make it, but we try. That's our golden rule. Is, hey, 48 hours, we're going to get back to you one way or the other. Even if it's just a maybe, we haven't heard anything. We still want to get back to you and tell you we're just waiting on feedback and we haven't heard anything. Because yes, I don't want that branding to be like, well, that company stinks, because they can still leave feedback for you on social media about your interview
Mhm.
process.
Exactly.
Don't want that. I want them to have a positive experience.
So you talked a little bit earlier about the different types of recruiters there are. I know that when I'm coaching candidates, they may not differentiate the difference between a corporate recruiter or a staffing contract recruiter or a contingency recruiter. So could you kind of walk us through that? And if there are any differences in working with each type of recruiter?
Yeah. So, I mean, you really, in my book, you kind of have three, and then there's little segments within those three. Obviously, you have the direct hire placement, the headhunters, so to say, of the world. There's different levels. There's contingency, there's retained, within that, there's contract recruiting. Their goal is just to get you placed. They take an order from their client and says we want this, 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 and this, and they walk you through the whole process. It's very much a very handheld process because they have a vested interest in you getting hired. Usually,
Mhm.
those fees are around 20%. So they can be really nice fees, and they have a very vested interest in getting you hired. So those are some different ones there. I mean, obviously, retained, a lot of pressure as a recruiter. I've done retained search. Usually you're taking a third of the money as soon as you take the job order. So you have a little bit of extra pressure to perform. Whereas with contingency, if you don't feel it, you don't feel it. You can fire the
Mhm.
client, just say, hey, I don't have any good candidates. And so that's a big one there. And I would say the big thing with that is those recruiters are specifically looking for a hit the nail on the head type of candidate. Most companies are not willing to pay a $20,000 fee for a maybe candidate. They want to say, hey, you've checked 8 of the 10 boxes that we're looking for. So I think a big thing with when you're working with those types of recruiters is really tailoring your resume for the position you're going for. Highlight the skills in your resume even after talking to that recruiter. Ask them, hey, what can I do with my resume to give myself a better chance, more or less? What should I highlight? What do I need to do? Knowing that they know the client fairly well, should be able to give you those pointers. To say, hey, do this, do this. This will make you a little bit more attractive. Highlight this experience. So that'd be a big thing I'd say working with them is just understand that they're really looking to hit the nail on the head. Staffing is different. Staffing is usually a lot of times, not always, a lot of times more entry level positions. And with staffing, a lot of times they're willing to take more of a risk to say, you know what, we're not committed. We're not paying a big fee. We're paying as we go. So we can kick the tires a little bit with a candidate. We can be a little more flexible on that experience. And a lot of times that is really about culture fit. Do you fit the brand and the culture of that company? And so my big thing with that is let your personality shine is probably the best way to say it. Show why somebody would want to give you an opportunity. That's on the staffing side. Corporate's totally different. My job realistically is to protect the company. We have to deal with turnover. We have to deal with retention. So for us, it's almost a combination of both to some degree to say, hey, we need to hit the nail on the head as best we can, and we need to hire for culture because if you don't work out, we're replacing you. My team has to replace that person,
Right.
which creates more work for us. So I would say, even in that regard, we're even more selective on the corporate side. When you're working with the corporate side, really tailor your resume to the positions you're applying for. Because again, a lot of companies, we don't hear, I'm not a big believer in the AI scoring, but a lot of ATSs have AI scoring systems. And it is solely based on the keywords, the number of keywords that you have in your resume, match the keywords in the
Yes.
job description. And some recruiting companies, if they don't have a full understanding of what the position is, what their hiring managers are looking for, they solely base whether or not you move forward in the interview process on that AI scoring. So if your resume doesn't score high enough, your resume may never actually get seen by a real person. And you could be spot on perfect for the job, and then they'll never even see you. And you're not talking to anybody like you would with a headhunter. So
Right.
you really have to tailor your resume to what job you are applying for to ensure that it gets seen and you have an opportunity to actually get interviewed for the job that you would be perfect for.
And you're really driving home the point that we tell people when we're coaching them too, that you have to tailor your resume for every job, whether you know you're going to work with a recruiter, whether you know it's going to go through an applicant tracking system. The key is to connect the dots for that recruiter, I think, and for the applicant tracking system. Make sure you've got all your keywords in there. Make sure that when that recruiter is looking at your resume, because you could look at 100 resumes a day. Is that accurate?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this weekend alone, I cleaned up our job postings. I looked at almost 800 resumes on Saturday alone.
Oh, wow.
Over 105 jobs. So it's not even like I'm just looking at a warehouse coordinator and this, 800 of them. I'm jumping between, a pharmacist, a pharmacy technician, warehouse, admins.
Hmm.
Got it. Yeah, it makes a difference. You can tell the people who have just a generic resume and they submit the same generic resume to every job versus the one who
Yes.
actually tailor it a little bit to the position they're actually applying for.
I would imagine that those people that are tailoring it have a little bit better of a chance of getting through both the ATS and that human screening. 800 resumes is a lot.
It is a lot. And plus, for me, it shows that you actually took the time to look at our job description. Like,
Yes.
so many times, especially on some job boards, we won't go into detail. With a click of a button, you can apply to 50 jobs, and it's just that simple. And I'm like, well, I can clearly tell you never even looked at the qualifications of the job because
Mhm.
you are not, you'll get a Starbucks barista that applies to a registered nurse job. And I'm like, you don't even have a registered nurse
Right.
license. You clearly just hit the easy apply, easy submit button type stuff, and your resume went out to hundreds of jobs. Tailoring it shows you read the job. Even if you don't have a cover letter, even the intro line that a lot of people have at the top of their resume, specifically addressing why you'd be a good fit for this type of position, shows a lot. And those are the things that'll make me move you forward to at least dive a little deeper into your resume.
So, do you look at those cover letters? Do they go through the applicant tracking system and do you look at them?
They do, and sometimes I look at the resume before the cover letter. A lot of times I see with cover letters, it's more of the why should I choose you cover letter, not necessarily relatable skills. It's the ones that are trying to, I guess, make a case as to why you should give them a chance, I guess, type cover letters,
Yes.
which I appreciate because I do love people who, this is why you should give me an opportunity, sort of that Rocky story. Can't do that for everybody. Some of our positions are very clinically driven, and licensure is licensure. There's no way around it. So I can't do that for everybody. But a lot of times I'll look at the resume and the position they apply to even see if it's from a skill, just a background perspective, and if it even makes sense to read the cover letter. So to me, the resume is still more important to me than the cover letter. It's totally optional than all of our job postings. But again, it shows me that you've really gone above and beyond sometimes, especially if you've tailored your cover letter to highlight the way your experience relates to the position as you understand it in the job posting. I like that. I like that a lot.
What kind of lessons have you learned along the way that have impacted your career?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I think I've learned is don't judge a book by its cover. Everybody talks about it, good or bad. I've interviewed a lot of people who, if you were to say, "Hey, is this person going to work out?" I'm like, "There's no doubt in my mind. These guys are rock
Yeah.
stars," and then they flame out after a week, on the job. And then I've had people where I was like, "Man, this is a long shot," who get in and they just thrive. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is getting to know people for who they are, what
Mhm.
drives them, what motivates them. And then I think professionally, it's forced me to hone my skills, I guess, personally, as being organized. Yeah, that's one of the things I preach in this business. Anybody I've ever hired, anybody I've ever coached,
Mm.
you've got to stay organized in this business. Otherwise, things fall between the cracks. And you never know when you're going to miss that perfect candidate that you just let slip because they weren't organized the right way or you're not efficient in your day to day. You've just got to stay organized so that you can stay on task and be as efficient as possible.
What kind of advice would you give somebody that's just starting out in this talent acquisition field?
I would say a big one is figure out what part of that field you like. Like we talked about, there are the different aspects of it, and they're different. Everything about each one's different, retained to contingent to staffing, to corporate. They're all a little bit different. So either A, talk to somebody, talk to multiple people in the different arenas, what they like about, their job, what they don't like about their job, or talk to somebody that's done all of it, like me, and be like, hey, what did you like about each and what didn't you like about each? Because there's different aspects to it. And I would say the big thing is the other thing, talent acquisition is not for everybody. I think the biggest thing is you really have to like talking to people. And I've hired a few people who, throughout their careers, they were like, man, talent acquisition is for me. And then after 3 to 6 months, they're like, yeah, talent acquisition really isn't for me. So do your homework, figure out which aspect of talent acquisition may be better suited for you. And again, the type of company you're working for. Find out if you want to work for a bigger company, a smaller boutique company. I mean, even corporate wise, do you want to work for a publicly traded company? Do you want for a privately held company? I think that's the biggest thing. There's just so many different aspects of recruiting and talent acquisition. Just do your homework, and if it's not for you, doesn't mean that something else. Maybe you start off in contingent recruiting. You're like, yeah, not really my thing, but I like the aspect of what I'm doing. Try looking at retained, search firms. If you're like, man,
Mhm.
this just isn't for me, maybe staffing is. Don't kick yourself if you find that you're like, it's just not for me, and it's your first go around as well. Doesn't mean that talent acquisition isn't for you either. There's lots of different avenues of talent acquisition you can look at. So don't just give up on it because the first one you try isn't really your cup of tea. And even within that,
Right.
sometimes you can have recruiting coordinators, you can have talent recruiters, you can be recruiting support. There's a lot of other things you can do as well.
Mm.
What you like, find out what you like.
A lot of the people I talk to have some common misconceptions about working with recruiters. I think one of them is that a recruiter will call them and say, hey, I've got this job. I think you might be a good fit for it. Send me your resume. And from that time on, the candidate feels like the recruiter is going to work to place them someplace until they find the exact right fit. And they don't understand that in most cases, it's the company that's paying the fee to the recruiter. So if you're not a good fit, they've got to move on. So
Mhm.
that's a common misconception. But what are some of the other misconceptions that people have about recruiters?
I think sometimes they think that they're only working with one client, one job, and that's their focus. I can just say from my experience, when I was an agency recruiter, I mean, I had anywhere between 7 to 11 jobs I was trying to fill at any one given time. I'm not focused on the one job that you had applied for. I'm going to split my day. I got to give my clients, I guess, equal time because they're all paying me a fee. But at the same time, for candidates, it's a good thing to say, hey, what's your priority level? Does your timeline match my timeline? And have that expectation. So I think that's the misconception is, hey, they only have one job, one client, that's all they're working on. Not the case in most situations. They're working a lot of different jobs, and you're just one, again, of many candidates. I think that's the other thing sometimes is candidates think, oh, they're only working with me. I might have 7 candidates that I'm working with for the same job, and you're just one of them. And you may not be the best, and not every recruiter is going to communicate that to you, is where you rank in the hierarchy of candidates. And I think you hit the nail on the head. The biggest one is, well, their job is to find me a job. And I'm like, it's not to find you a job,
Mm-mm.
is to find the best candidate for their clients. That's just what you have to deal with. So I mean, those are probably the two biggest ones that I've seen. I think if you understand those, then you start to understand, okay, sometimes it's on me as a candidate to follow up, because that may be the third one is, oh, they're going to follow up with me. They're going to call me. I don't have to call them. Wrong. Call them, show your interest. You take the initiative to get things moving, not vice versa. Be proactive.
When it comes to job applications, everybody wants to make a great first impression. What kind of advice can you give to candidates who are submitting their resume to any company, not just recruiters, but when they're applying for any job? What are some best practices they can do?
All right. So, first and foremost, don't go crazy with your resume. You get some people who, I don't mind a photo. I don't mind a photo at all. But in today's day and age, you got to be careful of discrimination with a photo.
Right.
I mean, just in all transparency, good or bad, there could be bias there. If you're on LinkedIn and they really want to go social media and research you, they will, and they'll get your picture that way. But that would be one of the big things. Don't put your photo. Don't get crazy with your formatting. It's okay to be creative, but make it so it flows. I think is a big one. Some people I've seen like just jumble it all up, like work history's here, education's up here, this is down here. And I'm like, I don't know where I'm supposed to read. I think another one is, if you're going to put a heading, make the heading noticeable. Feel free to put it in color. Just again, don't go all crazy with it, but color jumps out. I'm okay with that. It catches my eye. I will look a little bit longer. The simple is better. Don't get all nuts with the font. I've got some people that have like 4 different fonts on their resume. I'm like, it's okay just to use bold and italics in the same font. You don't have to use 4 different fonts on your resume because it's hard for me to make that transition and see what's what. Simplify it a little bit. And then highlight things. 9 times out of 10, anything that you're doing, accounting and finance, different roles, numbers, things that aren't just words jump out, or don't be afraid to use bold, underline, italics. Make it, if you want somebody to see something on your resume, make their eyes go to it. Use a different color because they will see that. And, lastly is hit those keywords. Again, even if at
Mhm.
the bottom of the resume in a footer, you're just hitting a bunch of hashtags just so you can get them in there. Hashtag the footer, just so your resume is going to be seen. And what I like to tell people is, don't just rely on your resume. Nowadays with social media and company directories, send an email. 9 times out of 10, you can usually reverse engineer somebody's email address or find them on LinkedIn, especially in recruiting, finding them on LinkedIn, and send them a message, be like, hey, I submitted my resume. Here are some high points, put 2 or 3 bullets in there as to why you're a good fit for the position. I really look forward to speaking with you about that. That way there, again, if the system doesn't push your resume forward, you just reminded them, oh, I need to keep an eye out for this. Do not be afraid to take the initiative. with recruiters, whether it's corporate, whether it's agencies. It's okay. And lastly, and I gave this to a friend recently, if you can figure out who the hiring manager is for that department with the company, it's okay to send them a LinkedIn request to connect. Sometimes it can get you in trouble if you send them your resume. Like they're like, man, I don't have time for this. But sending them a LinkedIn request with a note that says, I recently applied for a position with the company. I hope to hear back from you. Little things like that can sometimes set you apart from everybody else. But don't be afraid to do it. So many people are like, well, I'm not supposed to do that. I have to work through a recruiter. Stop. Very rarely do I have a hiring manager be like, oh, you better tell that person to stop. It's not, it's not taboo any longer to do that. It's okay. It shows that you've done your research.
Are there any pet peeves, or are things that candidates do that just you wish they would not do?
The one of the biggest ones is when they apply to the same job, even though they've been rejected, and they keep
Mm.
reapplying to the same job. And I'm like, how many times do I have to tell you no before you understand that I'm not going to interview you? Eventually, I'm just going to stop rejecting you as well. Or they reapply the same way. I'm like, okay, if you reapplied and added a cover letter, like, hey, I know you rejected me before, but here's why I think you should give me an opportunity. Okay, but if you're just going to keep doing it over and over and over and apply to the same job 5 different times or apply to the same job in a different location, you weren't a fit for the job in, Baton Rouge. You're not a fit for the job in New York City. Like it's the same job that you were not a fit for. And I understand that again, if you do something different the second time as to why I should give you reconsideration. But if you just send your resume and you're just doing it over and over, all you do is get me a little frustrated. And I don't want to put you on like the do not ever talk to list of things because I'm like, you're really starting to irk me a little bit. I don't know that I want to talk to you ever at this point. And then again, some of those resume issues that we have where they think that it's a art school application. And I'm like, you're not the case right now. Like, just simpler is better in a lot of cases. The resume is your way to get me to call you. It's not your interview. Let your personality really come through on your interview.
What sort of advice would you share with somebody who is looking for their next opportunity? Any last minute tips or encouragement you can give?
You know, a big thing for me, and again, I think it depends on what type of position you're applying for, but don't be afraid to take that chance on some jobs, where they may say, well, we're looking for a bachelor's with 5 years of experience in this, and this, and this, and this. Maybe you don't check all the boxes, but you have the it factor. You have an outgoing and upbeat personality, and you have some of those intangibles that can translate or translatable experience. Just because you haven't checked this box that you have 5 years of experience, do you have experience that is translatable? And if so, go ahead and put your hat in, your name in the hat. I mean, what's the worst they're going to do? Tell you no. It's hard to find candidates nowadays who check every box. I think you'd be surprised at how many companies will give you a chance and give you the ability to at least interview, knowing that you check most of the boxes. And let's see if you have all the other intangibles that we're looking for, because you can teach a lot of things. That's one of the things we talk about all the time internally here is what can we teach and what can't we teach? And skills are teachable. Personality isn't teachable. Teachability isn't teachable. Those are the intangibles that you can bring with you. We can teach you everything else. So don't focus on that. Focus on why you would be a good fit for that company and interview for that. I think that's a big thing I would tell people.
Well, Todd, thank you so much. That was great advice. We really appreciate you being on the podcast today.
Absolutely.
And I could talk for another hour about this with you.
Yes, I love recruiting, so I could talk a long time.